All right, if you're anything like me, you hate running out of food on a trip. It's like a big fear, and so I'm a big fan of snacks during an adventure, and one of my absolute favorite go-to snacks are Wonderful pistachios. You may be familiar with pistachios and the brand Wonderful Pistachios, but if you're not, they are one of the highest protein nuts out there. 1 ounce serving of Wonderful Pistachios is 6 grams of protein. That's 10% of your daily value. It also includes 9 essential amino acids, and they come with a ton of different flavors, varieties. There's a spicy version, there's lightly salted, there's no salted, there's so many, and every time I go on an adventure, I'm not even lying, I take an entire bag with me. And what's cool too, I love having the Wonderful Pistachio in shell, because then that almost gives me something to do and focus on as I'm paddling or biking through the really monotonous parts of the adventure. Every great adventure is going to have plenty of boring moments, and it's nice to have something to do and also something that is giving you some fuel, like Wonderful Pistachios. So they're one of my favorite adventure snacks, favorite road trip snacks, and definitely leave me feeling better than a lot of other snacks you can turn to. So if you want to learn more about how to fuel your next adventure with Wonderful Pistachios, go to wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Mason. Getting up a little bit later to this week as well. So sorry about that. Just catching up on life after being out west last week. I was able to go to amazing places like Mount Rainier National Park, out in Aspen for a little while. Got to hang out with some pretty cool people, which I'll talk about a little later through my day job, and some folks that I think you might recognize one of the names. I can't reveal anything just yet, but I'm really excited about this episode because Christine is an alumni of the show, one, and we don't often get to talk to people twice, even though I talk about it a lot. But two, we go way back. So I do mention this when we start talking, but Christine and I actually were neighbors in Yosemite National Park when we both worked there, living in these like military-style canvas tents with roommates, and it was a wild place. We had deer that were like living under the tents. We had raccoons that would break in at night and steal our snacks. It was a very fun summer and cool experience about 10 years ago now. And anyway, we got to meet each other then and just kind of stayed in touch. And she's gone on to do some incredible things, including thru-hiking the Appalachian Trail. She's done a ton of adventuring, van life, wrote a book, which is what we talked about the last time she was on, called Alone in Wonderland. And today we're talking about her new book, Blood, Sweat, Tears, which is a book about what it's like to be a woman out on a trail for an adventure, or on any adventure, really. It's a collection of 26 stories from women talking about that experience. So it's vulnerable, it's empowering, it's all about what does it mean to be a woman out on an adventure? Mostly trails, but obviously it applies to lots of different types of adventures, not just like backpacking and through hiking. And the categories of the book are blood, sweat, and tears. So each of those stories falls into one of those categories, and obviously contains elements of all of them. And so instead of really writing this book, Christine was the editor. And so we're talking about that experience, taking her outdoor and writing career to the next level by starting a publishing company. What I love about that is, it's a platform to get stories out there. That's all this podcast is. It's like that. A publishing company. I don't sit here and talk about my adventures all the time. Some of you might disagree, but my goal is to listen to people tell their stories. And yes, I do go do my own every now and then, but not nearly as often as I try to bring other stories in. I don't do an adventure a week, and we try to do at least one new episode per week. So it's really cool. I love this. I love when people think that way versus, let me get my story out there. Christine's like, no, let me build something so other people can tell their stories. So if you'd like to check out Blood, Sweat, Tears and Rugged Outdoorswoman Publishing, go to rugged-outdoorswoman.com. It's available now for purchase. And in tradition, we're going to give away a copy of this book. So all I need you to do is reach out to me, Mason at adventuresportspodcast.com. Adventure Sports Podcast on Instagram, on Facebook, any of those things, or info@adventuresportspodcast.com. Any of those, just reach out somehow. If you got my number, text me. If not, I'm not going to share it on this podcast to thousands of people. Just say, hey, I want a copy of Blood, Sweat, Tears. If you do that in the first 48 hours of this episode release, I will enter you into a pool, and then I will select by random a name. And as long as you're in a country we can ship to, that'll be fine. If not, we'll figure something out. But we did this last week with Jennifer McConaughey's book, Go Multisport. I love doing this because, one, it gets the author's work out there. It's not that much to buy a copy and send it to you. Amazing work here, Christine. Can't wait to have you back on to hear about what's next from Rugged Outdoorswoman, because this is just the beginning. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive in. Hey folks, welcome to the Adventure Sports Podcast. Today we are talking to an alumni of the show, Christine. I often say when I do revisited episodes, I'm like, we should have this person back on. That would be awesome to hear an update. And it doesn't happen that much because I'm always behind. But in this case, we are having you back on. Welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I am amazing. How are you?
I'm doing great. I have to tell you this, and I've been talking a lot, even in our intro, and I'll try to get it all out of the way in the beginning. My good friend, that's also my cousin, is in Yosemite right now, and he's staying in those tents that we used to live in, and he's sending me some pictures, and I'm like, dude, that is so wild. That was 10 years ago when we were 10 years ago. Right? Yeah. 2014. I mean, how crazy is that to think about, that we were camping, living like as neighbors really that long ago in Yosemite Valley?
Yeah. What's so funny is I'm actually in Tennessee right now, in Lindy's hometown for the first time. Lindy, my best friend from Yosemite. She was coming out here to visit her dad, and I was out here for trail days. And I was like, all right, let's go to your hometown. We've been best friends for 10 years since we lived in Yosemite in those tents as neighbors. And now we're hanging out in Maryville, Tennessee.
I can't believe I forgot this. I was in Indianapolis last week, and I went and saw my tent mate from Yosemite. His name's Jeff. We hadn't seen each other in like 6 or 7 years. And the last time we had seen each other was in Yosemite. Like, we had done like a rendezvous there like 4 years after we had been there. And so that was literally like less than a week ago. So how crazy is that? You're going to that hometown. Nice. How do you like Tennessee? Have you spent much time there before?
Not really. I lived in Little Rock for a long time, and so I would come to Memphis fairly often, which is like very west side of Tennessee. And she's from outside Knoxville, which is very right or east side of Tennessee. So this is like totally different experience.
Wow, that is really cool. Yeah, it's a beautiful area. Lots of vegetation, very lush, lots of water. That's one thing the East has, is lots of water. So I usually ask where you're coming from. Obviously, Tennessee today, and but where are you about these days? Do you have a place you call home, or are you just kind of all over the place? Every time I check in with you or follow you or see what you're doing, there's no telling where you are.
I would say I don't have a place I call home at the moment. I spent a good portion of the winter in Southern California, which was lovely, in the desert. And then I made my way over the course of a few weeks from Southern California back to Denver to hang out for a bit, and then now to Tennessee. And then I'm going to be on the East Coast all summer. So I'm just going to be like tooling around, jumping on and off the Appalachian Trail and doing a couple book events, and mostly just like kicking it.
That is awesome. So, the last time we talked, we talked about your first book, Alone in Wonderland. And it was one thing I love about that book. Obviously, the story's great, and you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I love the cover. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. It's on my shelf right over there. And it's just, sounds like something that you had really fallen in love with since we had last met, is just writing. And you're taking that to the next level with starting a publishing company, your second book, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Tell us about this story. What is it about? And why did you feel like this story had to get out there?
So Blood, Sweat, Tears is a short story collection with 26 contributors. about the experience of being in the female body on trail. So it's all hiking, backpacking, there's some trail running, and one mountaineering story. But they're all by women and non-binary AFAB folks. And it kind of, the idea for the collection came about because after my first book, I was doing book tour events, and I went to several kind of bigger events that were women's only spaces. And it just seemed like all of the women I talked to who were being held back from doing something in the outdoors had kind of similar concerns, which was like, how do I deal with my body?
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed like every space or every kind of like Q&A that got opened up, somebody wanted to like ask about period management. And I was just like, that's not what my book is about. And so I would get like a little frustrated by that. But then I really started to think about it and I was like, you know what, this is clearly something that is holding women back. That is a fear that we are dealing with when it comes to like going into the outdoors. And so maybe we should be talking about it. And maybe if that's not what my book was about and not what I wanted to talk about in the context of that, that I should create a project where that is what we're talking about. And then the idea sort of grew out of that. So the book is actually largely on the theme of relationship to body, which is a bit broader than just like telling a bunch of period stories. But there are a bunch of period stories in there.
Yes, blood, sweat, tears.
Yes. Yeah.
Why 26 stories?
Gosh, I originally put out a request for stories for submissions last June, and I was hoping to get around 100 submissions, and I thought that I would include between 15 and 18 stories in the book. The book's split up into 3 sections, so I was hoping to have sort of like three sections of stories with the same amount. So I thought either 15 would have 5 stories in each section or 18, 6. And then I ended up getting almost 200 submissions. And in the process of narrowing them down, I got it down as tight as I could. And 25 was what I landed on from the submissions. And then I wrote 2 stories. So like the 26 contributor is me. Yeah, I got to a point where I was like, okay, I've like narrowed it down. And I just really feel like every one of these stories needs to be in there. And that's where it ended.
200 story submissions. I mean, talk about a validation of the need for this book. And was it hard to, I mean, obviously it was probably very difficult to narrow down. How did you go about that, saying this one stays, this one doesn't?
Yeah, it was really hard. For sure, when I got the submissions, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this many people sat down and wrote a story. Like, yeah, it was super validating. It was like, not only do I think a lot of people want to read this book, but obviously a lot of people wanted to participate in the storytelling and a lot of people wanted to share something, which I thought was so beautiful. But yeah, if you think about 25 stories landing in the book and there were 200 to begin with, that's 8 books worth of reading that I did. And I really thought like, oh, I'm just gonna like read them all in like a week or 2 and then be able to say like these ones, no big deal. And it really became quite a process of narrowing down because I wanted to have a variety of subjects, but I also wanted to have a variety of places that the stories were taking place. I was also hoping to have writers from a variety of different locations and also with a variety of life experiences. And so trying to manage all those different angles on diversity within the storytelling and the contributors. And then also just like, are these stories good? And are they what I'm looking for in terms of story? It was a lot. It was a lot to think about when there were so many different things that I was trying to look at. And I was going to say, I learned a lot through the process. And I 20 or 30 times along the way said, if I were to do something like this again, I would not do this, or I would do this differently. And certainly one of the things that I would do differently is to have a co-editor and somebody who is going to read all of the stories with me and make all of the decisions with me, because it just felt like such a weight personally to take on, that all of these people had gifted me and trusted me with their stories. And I was just like the one person making a decision about who was in and who was out and what needed to be told. And that just was a little overwhelming.
Yeah, because it's you might certain days might hit you different. The same story and not being able to bounce a perspective or an idea off somebody, like, what do you think about this? And I think that's probably one of the most valuable things about human interaction is just the ability to see a different perspective, the ability to, I mean, I can talk to Emily, my wife, about something, and I go into it thinking one thing, and I leave the 3-minute conversation completely turned on the opinion just because of a different perspective. So I can imagine it was overwhelming. And also the writing styles. I mean, that's 200 different writing styles, and I'm sure that was a challenge to kind of flow as well.
For sure. Yeah. And when I put the call out for submissions, one of the things that I said was, you don't have to be a writer, like just tell your story. So I had like the greatest scale of writing, like knowledge and ability and styles, like all of that was just all over the place. So, some of the people who ended up in the book have published books of their own and are professional writers and like do that. And some of them were like, I've never had anything I've written edited before. And so going into the editing process with me was like a whole new world to them.
Right.
And there are people who are really like strong in their voice and they know what they want to say and they know how they want to say it and they believe in their style. And editing somebody with that skill level and self-assuredness is very different than editing somebody who's like, I'm just here, like I just wanted to share this and I don't have any experience or know what I'm doing. So dealing with 25 different styles, ability levels, personalities was also like a fun challenge, but definitely challenging.
Wow, I didn't even think about that. The people management and the expectation setting with the contributors. As a writer and as somebody who likes to express that way, is it hard sharing the space? Like I'll be honest, as someone on the mic all the time, when there's a totally different mindset that goes into interviewing someone versus being interviewed. When I'm interviewing, I'm like, let me keep my mouth shut, let me listen. When I'm being interviewed, I'm like, let me talk. So how did you balance that as someone who likes to share their point of view through writing?
I don't know if I thought about it too much in that perspective or like that in that way. I did for sure agonize quite a bit about other people's voices and allowing their voices to come through and what level of editing was appropriate to like, okay, how can we get this to be like very readable for the readers and like, keep the story from being confusing, like kind of what are the objective things that need correcting or like could be better versus what are things that are just like, oh, I just would like it better that way because that's how I would write it. And there were definitely times where I had to like, okay, check myself. Like, is this my opinion or is this objective? And writing is so impossibly subjective that's such a hard thing to even pretend that you're doing,
Were there any themes? I know that when you made the request, you probably said, here's the kind of stories we're looking for, the topics, but were there themes even within that started to emerge of maybe the same anxieties or the same problems or the same issues, kind of like with your book tour, seeing menstruation come up a lot as a topic? Was there anything else that just was like, this is a bigger deal than I realized?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that stuck out to me, and I think it's because it's not my perspective, was a subset within the blood category about motherhood. And I had several people contribute stories about their relationship to like giving birth and like having a child and then like being an athlete who is pregnant or has given birth. I really, because I have like made the decision that I'm not going to have children. This is something that I just like don't think about very often. And so as I was reading through the submissions, I was like, oh my gosh, there's like a bunch of motherhood stories. And so I had to kind of like put some conscious thought into making sure that representation exists in the book, and which stories to include that are along those themes, because that is something I hadn't even thought of when I was putting out the call for submissions.
What was like the anxiety around that? Is it because something I would assume is, how do I balance being a mother and pursuing maybe these outdoor goals? Or how do I, view myself now that I have this responsibility? And it's very different day-to-day life being a mother or a parent and, hiking the Appalachian Trail, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. I think within the context of the book being about relationship to body, it was a lot of things about how the process of pregnancy and birth change our physical selves, and how we see our physicality as athletes, and if that change is a threat to that, a threat to how our bodies work, a threat to how we perceive how our bodies work and look and move. Um, and yeah, there were certainly like a few different stories coming at that from different angles. Um, but I picked the ones that, because there were also some lovely motherhood stories that really didn't focus as much on the body experience, and the ones that I chose for the book are the ones that did focus more on that bodily experience. And I had one that was about the process of giving birth, and I had one that was about infertility and the struggle with infertility, and like hiking as a way of regaining trust with a body that isn't doing what you want it to do. Um, and those things feel so completely opposite, but they're so related.
Two ends of the spectrum, really. But I could see how that could be related to injury. Body not doing what you want it to. I feel like we've heard that phrase a number of times, and that can be so unsettling. I know my body doesn't do everything I want it to do all the time. You talked about what you learned through this experience. What do you think was one of the biggest either aha moments or realizations through kind of analyzing these stories?
I think there's been an interesting conversation going on since the release of the book, or maybe since I launched pre-orders, where I would say my readership for Alone in Wonderland is probably about 50-50 men and women. And so I have a lot of readers who are men who follow me on Instagram, and they saw the launch of the book, and the book has this beautiful floral uterus on the front of it. And I had men reaching out to me saying, I read your first book and I really enjoyed it. Like, am I allowed to read this blood, sweat, tears book? Like, is this for me at all, or should I just like mind my own business? And I've just thought that was a really interesting response, because the book is, yes, it is fundamentally about the female bodied experience, but it's about relationship to body. And men also have bodies, and men also have complicated relationships with their bodies. And I'm sure most of them have had an injury or something, right? Like something where it's like, my body is not doing what I want it to do. And that is a battle. And I'm trying to figure out how to get to a better place with the understanding and relationship there. And so I just think, even though there are specifically things going on in the book that are for women, I think, one, there's a lot of value for men to understand what the other half of the population is experiencing. And two, I actually think there's a lot that can be related to for anyone in this book.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something in the first few pages. It might be right in the first. Is just society has convinced 50% of the population to downplay the fact that 50% of the population is bleeding in their pants every 4 to 7 days every month. That's a powerful statement, because it's true. It's something that we don't have to think about, especially when it comes to adventure planning. What have you seen progress since your last book, Alone in Wonderland, about this topic and about the conversation around it?
Gosh, that's kind of hard to say, because I've been on a bit of a personal journey with it, where I've gotten to a point where I'm like, you know what? Like, I deserve bonus points for being out here when I'm bleeding. Like, what I am doing is different than what you are doing because of this additional challenge that I'm facing. And we should talk about it. And I'm not quite to the point of like blasting it on the internet every month, but I am certainly to the point of like, everyone around me on the trail knows that I'm bleeding. I don't want us to feel like we can't say that. Like, if you are having a problem with your knee and it's making you limp and it hurts every step, like, everyone on trail with you knows that you're dealing with that. So why would I need to keep it a secret that I'm like, okay, one, I have to go to the bathroom 5 times a day to deal with this, and like, two, it's a thing that's like, it is going to slow me down in certain ways. It is like, in one of the stories, one of the gals calls dealing with her period administrative issues. So it's like, I'm dealing with administrative issues. Like, I have things going on that like the people who are with me in my group should know about. And I think that's like my personal move in that direction over the course of the last year and working through this project, is just like, I don't feel the need to keep my period a secret. I'm just going to tell you, I'm bleeding right now. And I would love to see more women embracing that experience of just like, it doesn't have to be a secret. But I don't know kind of on the broader scale, like movement that's happening in that direction within the community at this point. But I'm hoping that this project will maybe push us a little bit further along in that direction.
How do you think your own adventure goals have been shaped over the last few years? Maybe it is in part with this project, or just, ambitions in the outdoors of what you want to do are changing.
I think I'm still on this side of the hill, if that makes sense. I think that especially right now, we're seeing a lot of women coming up in the ultra running world, which is like something that I've sort of gotten into as like a secondary thing to hiking, that are at the top of their careers in their mid to late 30s, and like hitting new PRs at 38 years old, or like winning races, right? So I think that there's a lot of potential, especially in endurance, like long distance endurance sports, for us to keep getting better well into our 30s and possibly even 40s. So I think I still have a mindset of like, oh, I haven't like reached my peak yet. Um, which I think some of us like think we have at a certain point, right? Like at a certain age, you're like, okay, my body is deteriorating. Like, I guess inevitably that is like actually true. But I think that we maybe accept that or think it about ourselves far before it is actually true. And so, I think I've really come into my own a little bit more as an a quote unquote outdoors person. And like in my early 20s, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. So everything then, my dreams were uninformed, uninspired. Like I didn't know what I should be dreaming about doing. And not to say that I've like mastered this now, but I just know so much more, and I am more creative with my ideas. And I almost am able to dream bigger because I know what I'm capable of in a way that I didn't back then.
Let's take a quick message break and hear from the folks that help make this show possible. Hey folks, if you know me, you know that I love coffee and I need it to function, and that doesn't change when I'm on an adventure. In fact, I'm drinking some right now. And that's why I really enjoy the AeroPress Go Plus. You might have heard of AeroPress. It's this easy way, really, really convenient way to make some of the smoothest, almost velvety coffee with a full body finish, but in a very convenient, packable system that's perfect for travel, perfect for adventures, and really mess-free. I like French press at home because I like that full-bodied flavor, but it's really hard to replicate in a way that isn't really inconvenient when you're traveling. And so this past weekend on our Swamp Drifters paddling adventure, I brought the AeroPress Go Plus with me, and I ended up making coffee for everybody, like 15 people. It's so cool. You put the grounds in, you put the water in, you take the plunger and you push it down right into the cup, and then you open the bottom filter, push the grounds out, and then just do a new one. It's mess free. It was super convenient, and it made really high quality coffee for everybody. And so we didn't have to stick with instant like we've done in the past. If you want to give it a shot, go to aeropress.com/ASP. That's AEROPRESS.com/ASP. You can also use the promo code ASP to save 20% off your order. That's aeropress.com/ASP and use the code ASP at checkout for 20% off. It's time to say goodbye to crappy coffee as you travel, as you adventure, and yes, to better adventures fueled by better coffee. We thank AeroPress for sponsoring our show. That is plenty of that for now. Let's get back into the episode. I think you said it more purposeful with what you dream about now, and maybe more refined in the sense of around that dream versus before. The world's so open that it's almost hard to have a theme about it all. It's just whatever catches our eye at the time, the valley or this experience. But as you go, it becomes more, you realize where the needs are. So it sounds like you're well on that path of what you want to use your skills and your experiences to do in this world through this book. And it sounds like more are going to be coming through the Rugged Outdoorswoman Publishing. I'm excited to hear about that. But I do want to hear, was there a story, or can you give us an example of what readers should expect with this book, like as far as what the stories are about? It's not how-to guides, it's not, hey, here's how I did the Appalachian Trail or this mountaineering experience or whatever it is, but it is meant to inspire people to do things like this.
For sure. And I think that one of the beautiful things about the collection is that it is such a range of sport, of activity. There are a couple fastest known time stories in there. There is 100 hikes in a year challenge. And like this woman went out and some of her hikes were like a 2-mile walk around the neighborhood. But she had a goal to hike 100 times throughout the year, and she had to redefine what that was because it turned out to be 2020 and the pandemic happened, and then she couldn't go certain places, right? So there's so much variety of what people are experiencing, and like I said, where they're located and what kind of trails they're on, and also what sports they're doing. That I think it's really accessible kind of no matter what level you're at or what level you aspire to be. But also every single story is facing some challenge, some obstacle, and sort of the moving through that. And so I think too, no matter what mental obstacle you are allowing to hold you back at this stage in your outdoors world career, like you're going to find something in there you relate to on that level too. That's like, oh, this person also was facing this challenge and this is how they got through it or how they shifted their mindset about it. So I think there's just so many different access points for kind of whatever it is that you're kind of currently working on.
Was there a story that stands out to you, particularly inspiring or easy to share through audio? I don't want to say it's like your favorite. I don't want to set any of these folks up for saying Christine has favorites among us. Or maybe it was a story that was great but didn't make the book. Because then there's no spoilers.
Gosh, it's been a while since I read all the ones that didn't go in. He's gonna cut out this long pause in the final.
No, I leave it for dramatic effect.
Yeah, I did. I could not cut any book out or any story out of the book out of these 25 because they all felt so important to me. And I think like they're all so different in so many ways. And there's ones that like I personally related to a lot. And then there's ones that I was like, this is not my experience, but I can relate to the feeling of it or the spirit of it. I think that there's one in the blood section. Maggie Seymour talks about running across the country. She did like, they call it a crossing where you go from East Coast to West Coast. And she gets her period on the road and she doesn't immediately register that that's what it is. And she goes, oh my God, I'm peeing blood. Like I'm going to have to stop this quest. And then she goes into her backstory a little bit and her relationship with her period from the time she was a teenager and talks about like feminine power and this, like, our bodies are just going to keep continuing to do what they do, no matter what we do to them. And the beauty of like bringing this obstacle along with you on the journey. And it's such a, just like any woman's kind of story, right? Like there's a lot of stories that are like about giving birth or about the medical challenges that we have with our reproductive systems or like kind of extraneous things to do with relationship to body. And hers is just like, I'm just a woman bleeding while I'm doing this. And then she goes on at the end to say like, then I had 3 kids. And like the beauty and the strength of that, which is not really part of the story, but I think it's like her relationship to her reproductive ability, her ability to like bring life into the world, from before doing that to having done that and the life that it brought for her along the way. That I thought was really lovely in a sort of like more broadly relatable way than some of the other ones, which have like more niche topics.
Was there a belief you held on to or you had that you changed or let go of through the process of this book, or maybe a misunderstanding? Because I know you
Um,
go in thinking, okay, here's what this is going to be about in this, but was there something that was like, whoa, that's different than what I thought?
I think probably the biggest one is that when I started this project, I said having 25 other people write a book for me is going to be easier than
It's
doing
gonna be
it
easier.
myself.
You know, it does sound easier until you start talking about it. I'm like, wow, that actually sounds exponentially harder.
It was absolutely foolish of me to think that.
Wow. That's I've been renovating a house for 4 years, and I thought it'd be easier just to build it from scratch at this point than just to have to tear out what you don't like, put in new, and then retrofit everything. And I just think just building something new would have been so much easier. So much. Can you just do it exactly the way you want it the first time? And it's probably similar experience where it's like, oh, they're gonna do it for me. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
put
yeah.
it together and kind of guide it to the finish line. And really, oh my gosh, I can imagine. All right, so that's one realization. Anything else?
Um, I do think, I kind of set this project up as a test piece for the publishing company. I said, I'm gonna go through this process and see how it is to work with writers and see what it is to be on this side of the business rather than, I mean, I was on this side of the business already, but like rather than being the writer, being the publisher. Um, and and I was a little bit closed-lipped about the idea that this was potentially going to lead into a publishing company because I didn't know how it was going to go. And I will say, like, I realized through the process that this is for sure like where I want to be in the outdoor storytelling space. I will potentially write another book again. I'm not like retiring as a writer, but bringing other people's stories out and helping them to shape and mold their story and really get across the point that they want to make with it was super, super powerful for me. And I'm really excited to like keep doing that.
What do you like about that versus being the one telling the story directly?
I think that to a certain degree, like I am one person with one experience. And though I could write a ton of different stories about different specific things I've experienced, like I still am only a single perspective. And I think that opening up the opportunity for more people to tell their stories and have help along the way.
Mm-hmm.
I did the whole process with Alone in Wonderland mostly by myself. I had professional editors, but in terms of like putting the book out there and getting it into people's hands, like I did all of that myself. And so having, one, the skills and two, the network now to do that, I really feel like I should be helping other people get their stories out to broaden the perspective base of what is available in the outdoor industry. Until fairly recently, like most of the stories we were telling in the outdoors were about white men. There's some lovely stories and really powerful things, and people have gotten really inspired from some of those stories and books and like different types of media. But I just think that we're at a place where people are ready for broader perspective stories, and we have people who can tell those stories, and we just need to like glue those two pieces together, like get the stories from the people to the people who want to hear them.
I'm sure with the submissions, your mind was going wild with all the potential stories to tell and just different ways of telling these stories. Is it almost, I mean, is there just so much, I don't want to say low hanging fruit. I feel like that has a negative connotation, but is there just that much fruit on the tree? I guess you could say, just like, wow, there's a story everywhere you look.
I think so. I do think that pretty much anybody has a story worth telling. They may not know what it is.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with
They
that.
may not be able to look at their own life and go like, oh, this is something that people would get value out of hearing. But I think that the potential is there for every single person.
And so, do you see any of your stories or the ones that maybe didn't make the book becoming their own standalone book or something else?
Yeah, so I'm actually working with one of the writers who is included in Blood, Sweat, Tears right now on her memoir, which I would love to see out in 2025, but we'll see how the process goes. And yeah, there's several other contributors to the book have books in progress already, long before I ever met them. And then also, yeah, I'm sure of the 200 submitters to begin with, there's probably some others in there. And I did invite all of the contributors to the writing group that I run. And I said, if you want to learn more or you want to have an accountability space to work on your writing, come. Um, and yeah, and now I've opened myself up. I always was kind of available to people who were working on projects to reach out and just ask me questions. And I've done several Zoom calls with writers working on projects to say, like, what are you working on? Tell me about it. Let me talk strategy with you and next steps and sort of like what the process looks like. And I've always sort of wanted to be available for that type of mentorship. And now I guess I have like a bit of a more official avenue for that. There's a page on the website that talks about getting published with Rugged Outdoorswoman, and yeah, I'm trying my best to like put the call out that's like, if you are working on a book, I want to know about it, even if you don't need my help or don't want to work with me. Like, I just want to know that you're doing it, and that way when it comes out I can read it.
Right.
But also just, yeah, I'm available for whatever it is that you whatever stage you're at. Like, I want to talk about it.
Well, what do you hope that all readers will take away from these stories? What is, like, if you could boil it down to one or two themes of, if you walk away with this, I, as the editor and one of the contributors and now the publisher, I'll be happy with that.
I think all stories, I want people to read stories and to feel less alone in whatever it is that you are facing, to find some place of connection and to be able to say, this person is like me in this way. And like, that matters. I'd say that's definitely the first one. And then I think something around the idea of shame around your body and kind of shaking that off. I do think that talking about things helps us to lose that shame that we've had ingrained in us. And I think our bodies are probably one of the biggest shame points that we all carry. So yeah, I think that relates to the first one about connection, where it's like, oh, this person has experienced what I've experienced, and so I don't have to be ashamed about it because I'm not the only one going through this. So I suppose those are like a Venn diagram situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So the two, that way, the lessons you learn, they're not alone either. There's two of them. They're together.
They make a great pair.
Yeah, they make a great pair. Alone in Wonderland too. How about that? Was that? I'm sure that comes into play. How did you see the effect with the challenges or the obstacles you're talking about between blood, sweat, tears, whatever each contributor's obstacles were? How did adventure or these outdoor experiences affect them? Was it vast majority being positive, being, confidence building, self-image improving? Was that a constant, or did that fluctuate as well?
I do think that was probably one of like a pretty overarching idea, was like, yeah, being out here in nature, moving my body in some way helped me to move forward in my progression with whatever this challenge is. I don't think that's always the case. I do think that an open call for stories along the subject of trail-based sport and body relationship is going to naturally collect the stories where like that was a positive interaction.
Yeah. And I mean, that's, I'm sure the vast majority of your and my experiences outdoors they are good for us.
We wouldn't keep doing it.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know. I know a lot of people that do things bad for them over and over, but yeah, it is life-giving, to say the least. And so did you see that just time and time again? Like, okay, our industry, our community, our people are right in that being out here doing these things is good for us.
Yeah, I do think that I really firmly believe that. I think that there are some pressures and social expectations in the outdoor world that can be really challenging. And getting into the outdoor industry can lead to like debilitating imposter syndrome or body image issues when comparing yourself to other people that you see outdoors. And those things can be pretty harmful. But I do also think that at the core, the experience of being in nature and moving your body is a good thing. And sometimes we have to peel away those exterior layers of expectation and self-image and comparison to get to the truth of the outdoor experience.
Did you have any particularly impactful outdoors experiences over the last year and a half working on this project? I ask because I find as a host of fairly large outdoor podcast, I'm often the person that doesn't get out. I'm editing the show. I'm staying up late to do this or that, or I'm spending the weekend like, well, I better stay home and work on this versus actually go out there and do the thing that we talk about. I don't know. Is that a challenge for you?
Um, yes and no. I definitely, right around the time that I launched the project and started working on it, I had a pretty bad flare with my chronic illness, and I actually was very sick last summer, which was like bedridden sick for a couple of months. And that was really challenging for me as I was working on a project about relationship to body, and I was having a really difficult body experience, but I think that the passion of these other people's stories and the way that I have ingrained my life into the outdoor world, um, it almost makes it impossible for me to walk away at this point. And I think that knowledge of who I am in that space, it was both difficult when I felt like I couldn't be that person, but also it was kind of a beacon of light in a way that was like, at some point, I will feel good enough to go do the things that make me who I am and make me feel good. Um, because I think that, if you're a casual hiker who has a desk job and, got a child, a partner, a family who expects things from you, other responsibilities that aren't just like, I'm an outdoors person, um, it can be easy to let those things, it can be really easy to let those things slide away in like a subtle way that it's like, oh, it's been 6 months since I've been outdoors. And for me, it was like every day waking up and not being able to do the things I wanted to do. I was like staring longingly out the window, going like, okay, like tomorrow I will feel good enough to do something. It kept me moving forward in a way.
I think what you talked about as being one of the lessons is personally probably the most important thing with any challenge is just the feeling of knowing you're not alone gives me personally the strength to just keep going. I'm like, wow. And not only are you not alone, it can actually go the other way. Like, oh my God, like I didn't realize 90% of the people actually do deal with this. Like that almost
Everyone.
becomes overwhelming. That like, oh my gosh, none of us are okay. It's with so much that could go wrong. It's crazy that anything goes right. Yeah. So with that time that you were bedridden, these had to feel so close to home when you were reading these.
Yeah. And I realized too, I didn't actually like get around to answering the question you asked, which was like, did I have an impactful experience? Because in the fall of 2022, before I got sick, I had attempted to set a fastest known time record on the Ouachita Trail in Arkansas. And things went awry, as they do with things like that. And so I did not end up doing that. And so after being sick the next year, I said, I just want to go hike that trail and see the rest of the trail that I didn't get to, and scope it out and decide if continuing to pursue that goal means something to me, if it matters, or if I just really want to hike the trail and but I also just wanted to like have a fun hiking experience where I did not feel like I was dying. And so, I was sick for really largely like all of July and August. And in September, I started to get back on my feet a little bit. And so at the end of October, I went out and I hiked the Ouachita Trail with a friend, and we took it at what I called a casual pace, but was not at all casual pace. But in comparison to what I had originally planned to hike it was very casual. And yeah, I got a chance to like remember who I was and to see myself being that person again, and to build a little bit of trust and mend a little bit of the relationship with my body, which I had just struggled so much with over the course of the year. And so being able to get out there and say like, I can do this and see it happen, and perhaps offer some level of forgiveness to my body. And all the while that I was doing these things, this project was happening. And so I was reading people's stories over and over again and giving feedback, giving advice. And a lot of times the stories also were tied to ideas about trust with your body and knowing what you are capable of and how to push yourself, when to rest. how to take care of your physical being. Like these are all threads that are woven through the book that I was like very much experiencing personally at the time.
What have you learned that the outdoors and doing these challenges don't do for us? Because something we've seen over the years and try to address is this idea of like escapism with adventure. A lot of people are like, I'm directionless unless I plan another big through hike or something. I got to have this goal. Did you see any stories or any, I don't know, unmet needs that the outdoors can't fulfill for people?
Mm, I think that what I have seen over the course of years of hanging out with thru hikers, and then kind of starting to get into the ultra running world, which I feel like is in some ways just an extreme version of the thru
Yeah,
hiking.
it's like compressing that
Uh,
timeline to, not having to blow up your whole life to do a through hike. Yeah, I can do it for this
yeah,
weekend.
and I think it really draws a lot of the same crowd. Those two sports, there's a lot of overlap there. I think the thing that I've seen the most is just the idea that the trail isn't doing the work for you. Um, and I think sometimes, especially when reading through hiking stories, we get this idea that like things are bad in my life, or like I'm having these issues and I'm going to go out on the trail and it's going to fix it and I will be better afterwards. And I think that that is a pattern that we often see. We often see people experiencing that. But a lot of times we don't see what it really takes or what that person is investing besides going out and walking on the trail. And I think when it comes to the quote unquote work, like you're the only one who's going to do that. And if you are going to go out on the trail and think that just walking a really long way is going to solve your problems, like I think a lot of times people do go out with that idea and then they realize while they're out there that they also have to do stuff, or just the monotony of the experience like grinds them down to the point where they can't help but do the work. But I do think that we have a misperception that just like hiking a long trail is going to solve XYZ problem in our lives, when really like it's you're going to solve those problems or not, like up to you.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's I can imagine it's the excitement sets in, but once that dies away, that's in the monotony of the experience becomes part of daily life. You realize you're kind of the same person if you don't decide to make a change. That's interesting. So with blood, we talked about what that's about. Sweat, I feel like that's going to be, that's a little more self-explanatory, just the adventure, the work of doing it. What were the ideas, or what tell us about tears? What is, because a lot of things can make you cry. A lot of things can bring tears. What are those stories about?
Yeah, they're really about the emotional side of things. There's like a breakup story in there, and like using the outdoors as a form of healing through like relational breakup. There's also grief stories, and then there's also like the trail is so hard that it made me cry stories. So it's like quite a range between the baggage we are bringing to the trail to heal the reasons we are crying that lead us to the trail, and then there are the reasons on the trail that lead us to the crying. But it's, yeah, there's still definitely a theme throughout of relationship to body or physical self. But those stories are definitely the more like, I call it ugly crying, emotionally driven stories. And it's so, I mean, honestly, like when I had the idea for the project, I conceptualized these three categories and I sort of like defined them. And then when the stories came in, I was like, wow, a lot of these stories could fit into two or three, all three of the categories. And it's almost hard to pull them apart.
So, something that we talk about a lot on the show is post adventure depression, or that kind of lull. Did that theme come up at all, of just dealing with what do I do with my life afterwards?
Gosh, I don't think so, actually. It's I certainly think that that is something we talk about a lot in the long trail world, like after a big through hike. But I know that it's something athletes experience in all different types of sport, where it's like the high that you experience while you're doing it, and then the like low that happens when you're doing normal life things that aren't high, you know? I certainly think there is some hinting towards or like mention of that throughout the book. And there is definitely one of the tier stories is about, depression and getting into the outdoors as a healing from depression, but it's not post-traumatic depression.
Can you tell us a little bit about where to get the book? Let's just share that now. I know that it's available for pre-order. Did it come out May 6th? Am I reading that right? Or does it come out?
It is.
Where would you like folks to get it?
It is available on Amazon. It's available all the normal places. Certainly, if you want to do your best to support the writers, getting it at ruggedoutdoorswoman.com is the better option. Also, requesting it from your local library or requesting it at your local bookstore, that can be super helpful. And I just signed a contract with REI that it's going to be distributed to all REI locations. So you could also...
Wow.
Yeah, they're not in stores yet, but very soon you will be able to pick it up at any REI location.
How does that feel?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Feels like kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. That is so cool. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
How when did you find that out?
Just like a week or two ago, I signed the contract. So
that is so cool.
Yeah, so we're still working out the shipping details, but
sweet. One just recently opened near me, so I will. I mean, I have it. I have the copy right here. So I will definitely know where to point people, though. That's awesome. Or your website too. So tell us maybe at this point, what can you share about, where your ideas are? I know you already talked quite a bit about Rugged Outdoorswoman Publishing, but where do you see this going? I mean, is there just... Do you already have ideas of what you want to talk about? Or is it like, I just know the stories are out there, we just got to go find them?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want a broad story base. So it is outdoors themed. So I know my audience is largely hiking and running. And most of the people I know are in the hiking and running space, but I'm actually really interested in opening up and getting some stories about other outdoor sport. So like snow sport people, bike people, water sport people, like I want your stories. And then, yeah, I'm looking for stories specifically written by women or gender expansive folks. And I'm really open to that. I think that one of the things I learned from Blood, Sweat, Tears is that there are stories out there I have not thought of. And so I'm really interested in that. I'm really interested just to see what comes.
That's so cool. Now that you're on your, I don't know, sophomore record, I don't know, what you call it, your second book, take us through, how has this changed the way you view your first work, Alone in Wonderland?
I don't know that it has. I think that the passage of time has definitely affected how I feel about the first book. Just because I am a different person in a different place than I was nearly 6 years ago when I started writing that. And I think there's a lot to be said in the writing world about your work as a snapshot of who you were at that moment, and being able to kind of release that and say, like, this is not necessarily me now. This is me at that time. And having put that book out into the world and sort of also released it in the way that's like, this isn't my story anymore. This story is for the world. Yeah, I try not to, I don't know, pick apart the past, even though it's still out there. People are still reading it for the first time and being exposed to that version of me. Yeah, I think that I am moving on from that story and moving into new stories personally and professionally. But I think that there's still something to be gained by reading it for people who haven't before.
Well, talk to us about that, because and then I'll let you go. I know we're getting close to time. That can be really challenging to share with the world, because we all look back at, in positive and negative, like who let me out of the house with that haircut when I was 15 or whatever it is. If you would have, we all find our poetry even from high school or college. And my wife's a creative writer, and so we read her stuff all the time for fun from way back when. And what advice do you have for folks that want to share, but whether it be a podcast interview or starting a publishing company or writing a book, but maybe are afraid of that voice just because of how it can change over time?
Yeah, I think that when people read something that they find powerful, they often say, what else has this person written? And then they go looking for it. And so, maybe 20, 30 years from now, I'll release a book and someone will go, what else has she written? And they'll go read Alone in Wonderland and they'll be like, this is amateurish and terrible.
Oh, you don't like it anymore? That's not what I was
Maybe.
getting at with that question, by the way.
No, but like I think it's really interesting when you connect to a writer and then you go read their, complete works or even just a couple things that they've written, that you can see how they've grown as a writer and you can see how they've grown as a person, especially if what they're writing is very personal. But even so much as like I read a romance novel by a writer some years ago, and then I came across another one that she had written and I was like, oh, I liked the other one, so I'll read this. And I was reading it going, this book is not very good. And then I looked at the release date and the one I had read first was from like 2014. It was like fairly recent. And the second one was from like 1980. And I was like,
Right.
oh my gosh, okay, this had to be like the first thing she ever wrote.
Wow.
And so but it was cool. It was cool to see the difference and see like, wow, she's really come a long way and like good for her. And yeah, there wasn't any judgment. I mean, there was the judgment of me like, this book isn't very good, but then I had a lot of respect for that journey. And I think especially for people who read a lot or who write, seeing that growth or change or whatever is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I recently had a similar scenario with the author I was reading. I didn't know the release dates, but they were obviously far apart, but it was like the age of life they wrote. Like one, he was 22. The second one, he was 65. I mean, think of the difference of a human being over those time frames. I mean, I can't imagine. I'm not there yet, of course, but at 22, I know I wouldn't be writing anything good. Let's put it that way. So interesting. So what do you say is on the horizon for you? I know hopefully the publishing company is going to keep you busy for, well, the rest of your life, potentially. I mean, that's like, there's a lot. I mean, you could do that forever. What else do you think, if folks want to reach out to you, are you going to be doing any talks or anything around Blood, Sweat, Tears? Any way for folks to connect or follow along with what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm going to have an event page on my website with events that either I will be hosting or some of the writers from the book are also hosting events. So yeah, if you want to try and catch somebody talking live about the project, definitely do that. I am spending the summer, like I said, on the East Coast. So I'm getting on and off the AT a few times with a friend, just trying to like feel out some miles and see how my body's doing after winter. Cause I am considering another attempt at a record setting hike in the fall. We'll see. We're just gonna see how it goes. And then I'm also hiking for fun the Long Trail in fall with Derek Lugo. He's also a writer. He has an Appalachian Trail book, and he is currently writing a CDT book. But yeah, he reached out, and we've been writer buddies for a while, just kind of networking in the publishing space. And he reached out and said, "Let's do a trail together. I think it'd be fun." And so we're gonna go hike the Long Trail in August.
Wow, that's awesome. That's what draws you to the record setting? I feel like that's just a totally different mindset than, just going out for a hike. I am not a record setter, or don't aspire to be. I just don't. It's like I can't. One, I won't set a record. Two, it's a pace I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, well, I would say the men's space in the record setting world is very competitive. I think that one of the things that draws me to it is the fact that there are just so many trails that don't have women's records on them at all. And I think there's just such an opportunity for women to show each other what is possible. And I just think we should get as many names on the board as we can, because like, I mean, the women who are at the top of the game, they're beating the men. They're setting insane records and like doing just like absolutely wild feats, and they're amazing and impressive, but they can't hike every trail. They don't have time. So I think some of us just regular people should get out there and just put something up. And I think a big part of it for me personally has to do with chronic illness and my relationship to my body, and this idea that like I could let that limit me, or I could take it as a challenge. And, maybe that's got two sides of the coin in terms of health. And like, is this good for me? I don't know. I'm still kind of working through that. But I do think that I don't talk about my chronic illness a ton, but it is something I talk about occasionally, and that, I'll have people reach out to me on social media and say, wow, you have pods and you're doing all this hiking and being outdoors. And like, I want to think that I will be able to do that too with the same condition. And like, thank you for putting that out there. And so I think there's some element of, inspiring others, and just showing what's possible. Because I do think when I got my diagnosis, the doctor said, you're a runner. And she was completely surprised by that, because she said people with POTS don't run. And she just said it as if it was a fact. And I was like, well, clearly they do, because I do. And it is possible. But I think that with that diagnosis, a lot of times people are given the impression that they can't do things. And so I want to be out there kind of saying the opposite.
Is there a reason that you haven't talked about it as much as other aspects of you? Is it just something you're not wanting to focus on at the time? Don't think you feel the need to at this point?
I think that the first, couple years after my diagnosis, which was in 2020, I was still kind of reconciling that for myself. And I was going through a bit of a mental struggle about it. And so I wasn't ready to talk about it. And then last year when I got really sick, I struggled to talk about it because I was so deep in that experience as it was happening that it was not possible for me to get the perspective. Also, sometimes it's hard to tell a story that doesn't feel over. And when I was in the moment of like, I'm not getting out of bed and I don't know when I will be able to again, it was hard. It would have been hard to talk about it then, because there didn't feel like there was a lot of hope. But now that I am, I say on the other side, I'm certainly not back to where I was before, but I am functional in a way that I was not. I feel now as if I am probably ready to start talking about it a little bit more, and still trying to figure out what that looks like.
Well, congratulations on all the huge successes. I'm going to let you go. And was there anything else you wanted to share with folks before we go? We shared how we could find the book. Also, I will introduce you. When I do the intro, I'll include all the links of where people can find it right at the beginning as well as at the end. Anything else?
No, I think that we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, see ya.
Okay, bye.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to the show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to grow in the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.